The purpose of the Global CFO Council is to provide an educational and networking forum for senior financial executives in order to share best practices, discuss current financial issues, and to learn about current topics related to the performance of their jobs. Membership is open to senior financial executives including CFOs, financial VPs, and treasurers. We hope that you'll become a member of the Global CFO Council today. To join, please visit the membership tab at globalcfocouncil.com.
Hey, Mike, how are you doing today?
I am doing well. Thank you, Robert.
It is super exciting to have you here. What I like to do is instead of reading the bio, I look on the internet and see what I can find about the person. And then I reveal it to you right before you start. And if I can find an interesting picture, I'll share that picture. And you know that's happening if I'm controlling the screen, which I am. So that is coming. Michael Sylvester is a virtual CIO and senior project manager at Net Services. And I know he knows what he's doing because he's been helping me all morning with my own personal tech issues. Got free service that I love a lot. Previously, he's been president at another IT service firm. He's had stints at GE and Bank of America. Got his undergrad in engineering at Duke and an MBA at Duke. So you know the guy did his homework when he was younger. And I think, these are some thinks, Michael. I think that you grew up, quote unquote, in Florida, maybe Sarasota, Florida, but might have actually been born in Virginia?
That is correct.
Damn. Lives in Kankakee near Charlotte now. I think you middle name might be Steve and might have gone to high school at Riverview High. Is that correct?
Yeah, darn Google. Man, too much information out there.
And
oh, there you go.
This is some of the best hair I've ever seen in my life. I've never, ever in my life had hair that good. So
that is a testament.
God bless you.
Yeah, which decade that came from. I was gonna say I am still young, but now you just blew it.
Yeah, that's good hair. I mean, obviously, I don't have any now. I've made you the host so you can share the real presentation, but super excited, Michael, to have you here. At my own company, we're having conversations about cybersecurity and the cybersecurity of our own vendor partners. The threats seem to be ever evolving. So really excited to have you present today. And I alone am going to have some questions. And so I'm going to mute myself and pass the mic, but really excited that you're here. And thank you for bringing this great content to the group.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Robert. And good morning, everyone. First, I want to thank everyone for taking time out of your schedule and choosing to spend that time with us. We hope that you'll find today's information of value. What we really want to do today is share with you a different perspective, which is important to really get you thinking of how to address current cyber risk to your business. First, who are we? Who is AtNet? And then go into some of the goals of the presentation today, what we hope that you'll take away with and what we're trying to impart. I'll then spend a very, very brief period of time talking about really the cybercrime industry, give you some statistics, and then move into providing 5 minimum security controls that you can take and walk away with today, really for this year, for 2024. I'll probably then break for a quick Q&A roughly midstream before we move into discussing something called a business impact assessment. And finally, give you some homework, some takeaway, things to follow up on. And of course, we'll leave some time for Q&A. So AtNet, well, we are first and foremost a security focused and a security first managed services partner. AtNet was founded in 1999, and we focus on the small to medium or SMB business market in primarily the southeastern United States. We have a proven process to reduce risk and increase efficiency for all of our clients. And we achieve this through a dedicated, proactive personnel with defined security and technology management processes. So in essence, we're much more focused. We're not the typical or historical MSP. And quite frankly, by today's sort of standards or verbiage, our why is to bring security to small and medium businesses and really help them thrive. So what are our goals for today? Well, first, I want to paint a clear picture of current cyber threats, things that your business is facing. This, in addition, I'll help get you a picture of the true risks in your business and how cyber comes in and plays into that. Then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about specifics, a few specific things that you can take away and apply to your business. My colleagues have challenged me to stay out of the weeds. My background, as Robert said, is actually in engineering. I'm a very detail-oriented guy. Also being in finance, corporate finance and investment banking for several years. I just need to stay out of the weeds. So I will commit to you to not get too far off track. And hopefully, if I do all of these things well, maybe I'll get a standing ovation, or I guess I can't see you. So maybe at a minimum, you just give a thumbs up. But hopefully you will have some takeaways and find some value. So what is this global cyber crime? I just wanted to put some numbers around, based on last year, the size and scope of what we're talking about. So total dollars generated. These are dollars generated to the bad guys or bad ladies. Last year was nearly $1.5 trillion with a T. Damage inflicted to businesses, and of course, all of you know, whatever direct costs, there are lots of indirect costs. If you're in production, if you can't deliver whatever product or service, that type of damage that has been inflicted last year, $8 trillion. And then the average cost of a data breach and the recovery, if you actually look this up, you'll see numbers from IBM and some other things. It's really in the $4.45 million range, but that includes large enterprise. What we've seen and observed is in the small and medium business market, typically it's at a minimum a few hundred thousand to around $1 million. So I sort of put $1 million in here and to give you some frame of reference. So how do these numbers compare? These are just some simple things that we looked up. Overall drug trade last year was $650 billion. All of organized crime was 2.2 trillion. And then something that I thought was fascinating is all of the global military budgets combined were 2.1 trillion. And you can see that just last year, the revenue generated by cybercrime is almost as big as that. Now, as a little side note, some of you may know, the US defense budget last year was approximately $782 billion. That's only half of what these perpetrators, the bad guys, brought in last year. So what's going on here? I mean, what is the motivation of these criminals? Well, plain and simple, money. It's just like anything else. Also, this problem, it isn't going away. Why? Well, the simple truth is we're not making it difficult or more difficult for threat actors to do what they do. And the money keeps growing. The pie, quite frankly, I didn't make a slide on this, but the revenue dollars over the last 4 to 5 years have been increasing exponentially. Well, some of you might be saying, well, we're not that big. You know, we're not Fortune 100 companies, perhaps. Why am I a target? Well, quite frankly, you're a business and you have data to be breached. It isn't just Change Healthcare. If you've been reading recently, the recent Microsoft breach, it's thousands of businesses just like you. And I want everyone to hear that, because we encounter this all the time with our clients or prospective clients, which is, hey, this doesn't really impact us. We're too small. They're not interested with us. They're going after the Amazons, the Microsofts. It's just not true. It really is If you're on the internet, you have data and you're generating any kind of capital and money, you're a target. So what can you do about this? I don't want it to sound like gloom and doom or Chicken Little, but of course the obvious question is, all right, great, Mike, what do we do about this? Well, as I mentioned up front, I wanted to give you 5, and these are minimal security controls for 2024 for you to explore and really make sure that you've implemented, or that your teams and IT departments have implemented them. What we found is that all of these are required by really most of the reputable cyber insurance companies. We get renewal applications, initial cyber policy applications that I review all the time, and these are coming right off of what the carriers are asking for. So what are they? First and foremost, MFA, multi-factor authentication. You might also hear the term 2FA or two-factor authentication. I think probably all of you know what that is. You're using it for at least your online banking, where you have your username, password, log in, and you have either a text message or some application to add that extra factor. You also need to have an advanced endpoint security. Traditional, what we call antivirus, is no longer adequate. The threats are evolving much too quickly, much too rapidly, and you need this next generation of detection technology. And you probably heard terms like EDR, endpoint detection, MDR. I didn't put it in here. There's another XDR. These are just terms that refer to an endpoint, this new technology of endpoint detection and endpoint security. Segmented backups, separated backups from production environment with immutability. And immutability basically means your backups can't be changed. They can't be deleted. It also means they can't be encrypted by the bad guys. One of the first targets when a threat actor gets into your systems is they target backups so that you don't have the ability, in a ransomware attack, for example, you don't have the ability to go back and restore. So this is another one of the critical security controls. Continuous vulnerability management. You need to have a system process in place that is constantly and continuously scanning for vulnerabilities so that they can be addressed and remediated. And then finally, end user cyber awareness training. I'll mention this again. I'll go ahead and say it up front, but people are one of the weakest links in terms of security. I use the analogy, you can have all the locks on your business, everything in place, but if somebody's going to go unlock the front door and open it and let someone in, any of those controls or security measures that you have basically become pointless, or they aren't beneficial if people thwart those systems. So actually what I'd like to do at this point is pause for a moment, perhaps give everyone a chance to catch your breath. I know I'm kind of plowing through this quickly, but I just wanted to see, having touched on this, if there are any questions, or even if Robert, if no one's silent or no one's speaking up, if Robert wants to chime in with anything before I move on. Go ahead, Robert.
I've gotten 6 questions. One is the size of the, I'm going to call it industry. Are these nation states? Is this organized crime? This is you mentioned 8 trillion impact, but 1.5 million trillion industry, if you will, in cybersecurity. This isn't just a kid in his pajamas.
No, that's an excellent question. I think historically we've thought of hacking threat actors as, right, the teenage kid in the basement, or Russia, or nation states. What we have seen is a very highly developed market with verticals, the entire supply chain. You have businesses that identify potential targets. Then you have a whole other vertical of businesses that develop malware, or the code to infect, infiltrate, gather data, exfiltrate or take data out. And then you have another vertical of businesses that actually use the list of targets, the software or applications, malware to infect, and they go after the targets. And they are basically funding or feeding one another. You typically don't have a single entity doing all three of that supply chain. It's very focused. These companies are very developed. They have business plans, mission statements. Quite frankly, they are more developed in terms of business plan, strategy, et cetera, than most small businesses in the United States. They have help desks. I mean, literally, you can, if you're the person or the business doing the ultimate reconnaissance and infecting, if you have trouble with the software, you can contact that company that you bought it from and get support. You know, hey, I'm not able to, infect them adequately. It truly is mind-boggling how organized and how structured all of this is. So the short answer is no, it's not nation states. This is a completely viable industry, business models, practice, vertically integrated, multiple verticals perpetrating all of this.
Is there any profile of a target, any industry size or geography make you more or less a target? Is the industry focusing on a particular segment, or is it all equal?
What we've seen is that no, there doesn't appear to be any target. They, for the most part, and I'm using the term they as a general term, the threat actors, you'll hear that term often in the security world. They're not targeting any specific, they're looking again. Remember, you've got that first vertical of companies that are identifying potential targets with weaknesses. So they're identifying, hey, there's a vulnerability that can be exploited. And then they're not going further typically, they're selling that to a company in the next vertical. So in essence, they're not prejudiced. They really don't care. They go where the money is, and it doesn't matter how big or how small you are. What's scary is when they breach your systems, they may be in your systems for a prolonged period of time potentially before ever being detected. What they're doing is they're gathering information, we're doing reconnaissance. They're figuring out all of your financials. And quite frankly, in a ransomware situation, they're tailoring, believe it or not, the ransom based on what you're capable of paying because they've already reviewed all of your financials.
Any systems most at risk or seem to be easy targets or a focus for these criminal organizations?
Well, yes, I would say not to pick on anyone, but the truth is just about all businesses now are using Microsoft 365, as well as a lot of other cloud-based products. Those tend to be the biggest targets because it's the most bang for your buck for the most part. 10 years ago, when you had a lot more businesses with their data on premise, everyone had servers in their office and maybe an IT closet. As we've moved to the cloud, originally, they had to figure out where your data was located, right? They had to figure out where your network was. They had to breach your firewall. Now, all these businesses are putting so much data out in cloud applications or in Microsoft 365. There's a big bullseye. I mean, the threat actors know that a tremendous amount of data is there, and that if you talk about focus to a certain extent, they know that is a big target.
You mentioned the small businesses can be targets, frequently are. A lot of small businesses, they might have somebody who's in IT, but they're really tech support or like a clerk level and are not prepared maybe to have this conversation. The CFO bring in this content. How do you broach that subject with maybe you've got a good tech support person, but you don't have a cybersecurity expert at your firm? who do you have this conversation with, or how do you frame this conversation and think, okay, there's a risk here, but my person's not at this level?
Well, I guess if I'm understanding your question correctly, there might be two ways or two approaches, depending on how I interpret the question. First, we're going to move into this in just a minute, where I'm going to discuss something called a business impact assessment. This is critical to identifying and helping give guidance internally, right? To where are our vulnerabilities? Where are our risks? And let's start identifying, quantifying that risk and developing a plan to mitigate those risks. So from a functional perspective, that would be my response to the question. If your question is, how do we start communication where perhaps there aren't internal resources that are as experienced from a security perspective? Is that what you were getting at, Robert, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, just a lot of small businesses have one IT person who's just good at working with hardware.
I think it's critically, and we believe it's critically important, just in many different industries. And Robert, I think you shared an example when we were talking the other day. In accounting, for example, you may have your books done internally. There likely is a process for a review internally, and you may even contract or bring in an outside entity to review. I mean, of course, and I'm not necessarily talking about public, Price Waterhouse having external auditors, but even if for a small business, we have clients that do have external auditors come in and do that. The same thing, the same thought process should be applied to technology. Whether you have that adequate knowledge internally, or even if you've taken a first brush, it's so important to bring in a third party, an expert, to be able to lend that extra pair of eyes, go through, review, and it needs to be a collaborative process to identify and really deal with these things.
All right, I'm going to hit you rapid fire with 3 or 4 more questions. You get
Sure.
6 seconds per answer. All
right.
One is, you mentioned continuous vulnerability management. What is that? Give me some examples.
So, and I'm not getting into any products, but there are business products, tools that basically get loaded within your environment that go out and monitor and look at all endpoints, devices, etc., mapping that. Well, let me take a step back. So everyone knows that you get these updates for your computer all the time, right? Oh, you need to reboot your computer, new updates available, etc. That, in essence, is a small part, if you will, of vulnerability management, right? Microsoft is patching, in many cases, the security patches, known or discovered vulnerabilities. The problem is you have so many different pieces of 6 seconds, pieces of technology in the environment. It's not practical for a human to do that. So when you hear the term continuous vulnerability management, it's simply a tool, a software application that's in the environment that has the capability of scanning all of your assets, mapping that against known vulnerabilities depending on the asset, and identifying those so that with risk levels even, so that then your team or a team can assess and deal with whether it's a patch, whether it's firmware update, etc.
Michael, if these 5 minimum, if you don't have these 5 minimum, does it mean you don't get coverage from some carriers, your quote or your price is higher? What happens if you don't have these 5 minimums?
The short answer is it depends. There are some carriers that if you don't have MFA, they won't even underwrite you. At the best case scenario is you will likely be rated. I think everyone knows what that is. Your premiums will be higher than they otherwise would be. It's akin to health insurance. Are you a smoker? Yes. Oh, your rates just got jacked up, right? Your risk is higher because you don't have some minimal controls. And these are changing. We're seeing the insurance and the cyber insurance environment become more and more sophisticated. And it seems like every 3, 4, 5 months, 6 months, I'm seeing more detailed and specific questions in these applications or renewal checklists.
I've got 3 or 4 questions on training. I'll put them all kind of together. Any recommendations on frequency, type of training, maybe some tools, training your employees on cyber? And then I'll throw one in there is just getting people to take it, like watch it. There seems to be like participation fatigue or video watching fatigue, no matter how funny or short you make these things. Any comments or suggestions, tips in the training if we are trying to be proactive? Any tips?
Well, first of all, it has to come from the top. Meaning if all of you all aren't on board and supporting this, then how can you expect the rest of your team to buy in or do it? Number one. Some of the things as far as incentivizing individuals, we've seen clients that have actually put incentive programs that if you're set markers and milestones, if you're doing all of your training, or if you have a certain score, some of these products, it's important to make sure that you have products that aren't just video training, but that also have, and we've all seen this, but phishing, and that there's a feedback mechanism that users know and are in a way, I say held accountable, that if you have a user that's failing, well, then there needs to be a conversation and addressed that through potential additional training. But we've seen clients that have offered, gift cards. It might just be a $20 gift card or whatever for the top performers. Some of these products have scoring where if you're up on training and you do well on the little mini quizzes, things of that nature, if you're phishing successfully, you're not getting tricked or tripped up, then you have a higher score. So it becomes a little bit of a competition. Those are a couple of the different ways that we've seen businesses address the end user, getting interest up and getting people to do it. But the bottom line is, I'll mention this again later because it does merit repeating. Security tools products are only about 25% of what's going to protect you. The rest are people and processes. And I mentioned it earlier, people are one of the biggest sort of potential weak links in the security chain.
I'm writing that down. All right, this is awesome. I have 10 more questions queued up, but we're going to kick it back to you and the presentation. I know there'll be some time at the end, and I'm going to hit you rapid fire.
That's fine, and I'll try to.
Questions. This is awesome. Thank you.
I'll try to not be so detailed in my answers. So, what can we do? Where do we start? Really, what I want to go over now, and some of you have, this might be new. Some of them, this may be a review, but a business impact assessment. What exactly is it? Well, in essence, it's how does your business, the first question to ask is how does your business make money? And really digging in from the beginning of whether it's a service, whether it's product, how are those leads generated? How are orders created? How do they come into the system? Really starting to walk through that whole process. And that essence or that exercise is beginning to list the technology that's involved in each process or business unit throughout this cycle, if you will, from order sale to collection. Identifying who internally owns that particular process. And what exactly do they do? Which applications are involved? Identifying those specific applications and where are they located? Are they in an on-premise server? Are they in a cloud environment somewhere? Who uses? Identifying the actual personnel that are accessing and using those applications. And where is your data stored? Right? Is it on-prem? Is it in the cloud? Is it in 365 somewhere? How is that data transmitted? Is it being transmitted securely? And backups. Do you control the backups? If you don't, then what's the SLA or the service level agreement? How quickly are you being guaranteed that environment can be restored and put back into production? And whether it's you're in control internally or not, are your backups being tested and validated? Backups that aren't tested basically are not, they really aren't of value, because inevitably when you need it most, an untested backup likely will fail and will not work. And that is not the time that you want to figure out that, hey, our backups aren't viable or there was some breakdown in the process. So what's the impact to your organization? The average time following a breach that you would potentially not have access to 100% of your data is about 21 days, 3 full weeks. So what is the impact? If you potentially can't access one or more of your core applications or all of your core applications, can you survive a day? What's that impact? A week, 2 weeks, 30 days. It's important to walk through that process and start identifying this. Do you have accounts? User accounts separated by function. Are there users logging in with administrative credentials when they shouldn't be using administrative credentials? Again, are all of these systems protected by MFA, multi-factor authentication that we mentioned earlier? Getting into procedures. Do you have procedure for onboarding users to make sure that they have an appropriate level of access when their account is created? You may hear a term called least privilege or lowest privilege. That's simply put, making sure that every user has only the minimum amount of access and security required to perform their job functions. Do you have an offboarding procedure when an employee leaves or if an employee is terminated, to make sure that all the access that they did have is effectively and completely terminated? So one thing that I wanted to mention is some of the examples of, okay, so Mike, we walked through this process. What are some of the things that get uncovered? I wanted to mention one brief thing related to MFA. Well, actually, I'll mention it in a minute, but some of the things that get uncovered are discovering that there are systems that maybe contain proprietary confidential data, no longer user accounts that are no longer in use, that are still active, access, as we mentioned, for users that have been terminated. Cloud systems, sometimes we forget. It's sort of, we have it in the cloud, but we don't really think through because somebody else is managing and overseeing that. Maybe that critical data isn't being backed up. Just as an example, Microsoft 365, if you read, and I know no one ever reads that whole license agreement, we just click through it, but if you actually read it, Microsoft does not guarantee the integrity of your data or that they will restore your data. Their guarantee is a system or infrastructure guarantee. So that's just an example. Is your cloud provider adequately backing up your critical data? And that identifying systems, critical systems that maybe have weak passwords or no MFA on them. MFA not being enforced on all applications and for all users. We see this all the time. In fact, we came across a company in the last few months that suffered a breach, and the point of entry was the CFO's account. Not to pick on everyone here, he didn't have MFA enabled because he thought it was too cumbersome and it impacted his productivity. So he basically excluded himself from the MFA requirement. And guess what? The attackers found his account, compromised his credentials, and that was how they got in. So what are the benefits? The business impact assessment allows you to assess your business risk and prioritize investments. As CFOs, obviously we budget and allocate capital expenditures, across the organization, that's an integral part of that role, right? Well, in security and in IT, it's no different. You need to be able to identify and assess appropriate risk and determine where those dollars are going to be spent, because we don't have unlimited budgets. The BIA is really the only way to build an effective cybersecurity strategy. Also, it contains key data through this process that I just described or summarized that can be used in your IR, incident response plan, a disaster recovery plan, and your business continuity plan. And this is a subject for a different presentation, but please make sure that you have a documented each one of these: IR plan, business continuity plan, DR plan. We frequently come across, I talk to folks that they'll say, yes, we have an IR plan, incident response plan. And I'll say, well, may I look at it? Well, it's not really written down. Make sure that it's documented. You don't want to be trying to discover whatever the scenario is. You don't want to be making decisions and trying to figure things out in the heat of the moment or during a breach. You want to be following something that's already a plan that's been laid out, well thought out, etc. If technology alone could solve our cyber problem, then we wouldn't hear about breaches and read about them just about every day, it seems. I mean, the bad guys would be out of business. And again, as I mentioned, the truth is, if we could buy products or tools only really account for 25% of solving the security problem. The other 75% are your people and your processes. So homework. What do I want all of you to do? Take a moment, review your cyber. If you have cyber insurance, review it. When was the last time you actually reviewed the policy and not just renewed your policy? If you don't feel comfortable reviewing it, enlist a trusted partner who can look at it. And it's not always your agent or your insurance provider. You can find external experts that will go through and look at that and help you review that it's not only adequate coverage from a limits perspective, but from a overall coverage and exclusions perspective. I want everyone to seriously think through, do you have all of these? Robert, you mentioned it a few minutes ago. Do you have these 5 minimum security controls? If not, what's your plan? Are you going to develop a plan to get these in place? And then go through the business impact assessment exercise. If you don't walk through the process in a somewhat structured way, it's not going to provide the benefits that it can. And last and just as important, if not most importantly, engage an expert to help. Security is changing. I mean, daily, I know it might sound like a trite statement, but it really is changing and evolving constantly. It's important to seek external expert help to help guide you through this process. So one other thing that I wanted to mention before we get to Q&A is, Robert, you asked me about, some kind of horror story. I don't know if any or some of you probably read in the news very recently a business in Hong Kong. Everyone's talking about AI, right? AI is great. We want AI. Let's deploy AI. AI is almost like the going to the cloud was 10, 15, 20 years ago. There was a company in Hong Kong that was basically conned through using AI. In essence, there was an individual that was contacted purportedly by the CFO of the UK parent wanting to have a video conference. And the short of it was this individual had a video conference with not just the CFO, but multiple senior management. And coming out of that was instructed to wire funds. And I believe they ended up wiring about $25 million. But the point is, these were live videos of the individuals with their voices. Every single one of them was generated by AI, by the perpetrators, the threat actors. So Robert, you challenged me to come up with some kind of horror story. That's pretty scary stuff. The point is not to scare everyone and freak everyone out. The point is to say, the threats are real, the threats are evolving. What are you going to do about it? And get a plan in place.
That's good. The questions are stacking up.
I'm
So
sure.
I'm going to hit you rapid fire. You get a minute apiece, and a little more specific this time around. So first question is to drill into the continuous vulnerability management. Is there give me an example software, or can you outsource this to like a firm to do it for you? Like, give me more detail on that.
Typically, and I mean, I know we're a security managed services provider, but truly, you want to make sure that you're not just deploying a product, but that there is external input, review, etc. There are products, and I don't want to single out any individual software product company, but there are products that will deploy and do that. You want to make sure that there is some sort of team security operations center. The bottom line is you can't do this on your own, right? There are, just as I mentioned earlier in the earlier question, there's too much for individuals or even a small team to really handle. It is overwhelming. So enlist the outside help to not only deploy the tools, but to have the monitoring, review, and remediation that's necessary.
Any specific companies offering cyber awareness training, a specific service or company or tool that you'd recommend that, hey, they do a really good job of the content and somehow getting people to participate? Any suggestions?
There are a number of good companies out there. KnowBe4 is one of them that we come across. There's also a company called Breach Secure, which has an excellent end user awareness, cyber awareness training program. Those are a couple. There are some out there. What I would encourage, and I'm sure everyone will do, just do your homework, talk to each other. If you have colleagues, hey, do you guys have a cyber training program? What do you use? How does it work? Meaning, how well is it working? Is it end user friendly? I mentioned a couple examples about how to improve internal interest on your teams. Also, again, this is a tremendous forum of peers. I would encourage you to take advantage of that and talk to your peers and compare what are you guys doing? How is that working for you?
This industry, I'm calling it an industry, is huge, and it's illegal. And there's entire departments of the federal government who go after people who are selling like $8 worth of marijuana. So why aren't the authorities more active tracking down these criminals with an average transaction size of $1 million, or frequent transaction size of $1 million? There seems, if I were to like the level of policing of federal investigation seems low compared to size.
Well,
why aren't they more active tracking this down?
I don't want to. I want to be transparent and say that I can't really answer specifically details about how much the government is or is not going after. I can tell you that I guess a bigger question is, are they trying to go after, and are they going after these groups? The answer is absolutely yes. The point is, this is roughly this industry, and it is an industry. We're not calling it an industry. It is a well-organized, well-defined industry. It's roughly 8% of global GDP, 8% for cybercrime. That's mind-boggling. And to answer your question, it's not why aren't they going after them? They are. The perpetrators, they're incredibly brilliant. They're not the 13-year-old teenager in the basement trying to hack systems. I mean, some of these are formally educated, highly educated individuals. And again, the dollars are there. They're in many cases, they're staying one or more steps ahead of authorities. And just a simple example, a lot of times perpetrators, they will stand up systems, execute like the third vertical, right? They'll stand up systems, execute the attack, get what they want, and then they'll actually collapse and shut down everything. So it's almost, I mean, this might sound silly, it's like playing whack-a-mole, right? One pops up here, the government goes after them. Maybe the government gets to those sites and shuts them down, but that's okay. They just then move over, sorry, I was off screen, move over here and spring up again. The short answer is they are going after them, but these are incredibly brilliant attackers and businesses. I mean, they are businesses, albeit illegal businesses.
Is Microsoft Teams any more or less secure for financial communication than just Microsoft Outlook email?
I guess it depends. It might depend on who you ask. Email in general is not secure at all. Meaning, many of you and in the financial world, we have adopted in a much greater, to a much greater extent, encrypted email that does afford much greater security. But we always tell clients, anything that you send via just good old-fashioned email, you need to assume that A, it can be observed, confiscated, whatever, and B, the fact that you think it's just going from you to the endpoint, make the assumption or operate under the assumption that that data could be going anywhere. I would say as a whole, Teams is part of the overall 365, what Microsoft calls the 365 tenant. Appropriate tenant security is paramount. Microsoft, and this is, I'm not going to get in the weeds. Up until fairly recently, Microsoft 365, there weren't a lot of default security controls in place, which means somebody or a business or whomever stands up a new 365 tenant. Hey, we've got all our email in there, et cetera. But what you don't realize is there are all kinds of doors, back doors, side doors that are left open. Microsoft has taken a step to shut some of those doors, but don't rely on Microsoft to solely, try to give you comfort or secure your data. Microsoft has been breached twice, high-level breaches just in the last 6 months. And they were breached in a way previously, not the most recent breach, but where government accounts within 365 were breached. Bottom line is, don't use email for any sensitive communications. I didn't touch on it here, but another, ransomware is one term of cyber attack. Another is something called business email compromise, which is basically where a user's email account is compromised, access. I'll just say that business email compromise is super, super easy for the bad guys to do. So don't rely on Microsoft, whether it's Teams, whether it's communicating email or anything else. You need to take additional steps to secure your environment, cloud or otherwise.
You mentioned the new threats that are emerging because of AI and machine learning. Any tools emerging for defense, AI-enabled tools that we can deploy to help defend against these? Any emerging companies coming out with something worth checking out?
I would say that AI presently, my understanding, is more of a tool for the attackers to develop, better attacks, better strategies. It's also on our side, a tool that we utilize to better analyze, it's proved to be tremendously valuable for coding. Excuse me. AI is being Pardon me, just a minute. AI is being interjected by a lot of the security companies. It's used in endpoint. I remember I mentioned one of the 5 security controls is advanced endpoint protection. The top companies are utilizing AI within their products to provide better endpoint security. There are email security products in terms of filtering and monitoring that are now using. It is very much a race to utilize AI as much as possible in all of these areas. And I apologize, I didn't put do not disturb if you heard that ring in the background.
It might be the hackers.
It might be. No, actually, I just received a message. Thankfully, you have MFA and 27 other tools and security controls in place. Attack was thwarted. No, I'm just teasing. I will say that 5 is just the start. Okay. If you partner with a solid, like I said, we said, external expert security focused company, there are frameworks. I'm just going to throw NIST, CIS controls. You may or may not have heard these before, but there are frameworks to go way beyond securing your environment than just the 5 base ones. But we wanted to give you something that was achievable, it was attainable, that everyone could walk away with today. So the short answer is there's no magic AI product, but many of these security vendors for endpoint protection, email security, et cetera, are already utilizing AI within their products to have better detection, better remediation, et cetera.
You mentioned NIST. There's also ISO and CMMC. Any standard that you think, if we're trying to compare ourselves to a standard, is there one you like better than the other? NIST, ISO, CMMC, and then there's different levels of some of these, like CMMC. If you're a defense contractor, 1, 2, 3, 4. I think it goes up to 5. Any thoughts on the standards?
Yeah. So again, my understanding from a cybersecurity perspective, really kind of the first standard was NIST. There are a lot. One of the ones that you'll see most often is NIST. It's 800.171 if you care about looking it up. And then I mentioned CIS controls. CMMC is really a certification that comes out of NIST that government contracts or contractors, subcontractors are required. CIS, so from a certification perspective and controls, CMMC is more on the government contract side. And what you'll typically see on the CMMC side is what is called level 2. CIS controls is typically more applicable on the commercial side. And it's more practical. NIST does provide a framework, but from a practical production implementation or execution strategy, what we've seen is CIS really gives better and more focused guidance. And CIS actually breaks up in a way similar to CMMC, but they have different levels of what they call implementation groups. You'll hear IG1, IG2, IG3. We recommend that all companies at a minimum deploy and implement all of the IG1 controls. IG2 controls, if you are in a more sensitive financial perhaps environment, you want to make sure that you're into that. And IG3 really gets into the greater regulatory compliance, which financial institutions, some of other regulatory controlled businesses have. Basically, and then ISO, you mentioned ISO. ISO is, of course, the international standard. So for most of us, I'm guessing on this call, really, you're either going to focus on kind of the NIST CMMC certification side if your business provides any government contract related. You don't have to be direct government contract. If you're anywhere in the chain, you will likely see in the very near future the requirement for CMMC certification. And then remember, CIS controls, Center for Internet Security, is really applicable on the commercial side. It's one of the, and from our perspective, if you're non-government, that's probably one of the most useful on that side. But let me just say, start with the BIA, the Business Impact Assessment. Then you can get help. After walking through that process, you can get help with the appropriate framework to apply to help secure your environment. Without that business impact assessment, then you really don't have a way to effectively, you haven't identified and quantified risks, and you don't have a way to effectively prioritize what needs to be addressed.
Excellent presentation. I love that it was so practical, and I got some awesome takeaways. I'll share a quick story that it's not just you have to worry about. It's the partners of your key vendors. I have a partner of a key vendor that has a security issue and is making it so I can't do something through this very important vendor that I need to do. So it's not just your own company we have to worry about. You really need to understand the security levels of your very key partners and critical systems. Hey, if this is a problem, it could be $1 million problem. So this is worthy of the CFO's time. We got 5 minimum security standards to have a conversation with our IT team about. Access audits are always important. What a great reminder. I loved the 75% of the solution can be people and processes, and the gamification, a prize for participation in the training, I think is a great key basic takeaway.
And let me, real quickly, I'm sorry, one more thing along that training that I didn't mention. Encourage your people to report. If they make mistakes, foster an environment of self-reporting, that they're not going to be reprimanded or, lose their job. The sooner that you know that one of your people has clicked on something or done something, the better and more effectively you can address it. So encourage that in your environments as well.
Thank you very much. You don't have to do this alone. If you're like, my goodness, I only followed about half of this, I can't do this myself, reach out to Michael. We got great partners, obviously knows what he's talking about. I'll share a copy of the presentation, his contact information, and the video. Everyone have a wonderful day. Goodbye.